do anything else either.
All right, I think it's the top of the hour and we're going to go ahead and get started. And welcome to our webinar for September. It's hard to fathom. It's almost the end of the year already. I guess September's not quite there, but it's starting to feel like it. At least in Texas, it still feels like summer. And I'm ready for a little bit of cool air. So if you've got any cool air out there, feel free to make me jealous in the chat today. So today, Dwayne McNally, part of the MortarStone team, and today I've got the incredible privilege of having my friend Tammy Bunting join me. Tammy has worked with us at MortarStone in different roles, but most of all, she's been a CFO in churches and other nonprofits, and she's got some great experience that she's going to share with us today, talking about beyond per capita giving, or giving per capita as far as when we're building budgets. And so just before we start, just want to let you know that you can chat with us or you can put questions in the Q&A. Nathan, thank you for saying it's 94 in Abilene. I don't feel it's quite so bad now. So, you know, any of that kind of encouragement's great. So Tammy, welcome. Glad that you are with us and looking forward to the conversation today as we talk about budgeting.
Yeah, me too. Dwayne and I, we have a great camaraderie and a lot of topics come up, and it was so interesting that while we were writing this blog, and this is a blog that we did earlier, so many people within the church system were asking me and Dwayne about how we, what do you guys do, or what happens with the average gift per attendee? And so I kept saying we need to do a webinar. So here we are. And we really want to welcome the questions or observations, because I know as a CFO, being in the church world all of my life, that was basically the only metric I had, was an average gift per attendee. And eventually got to the point where that single snapshot just wasn't enough. It might have been enough at a period in time, but I needed more clarity, and I actually needed to be more strategic with data. And so we're going to engage in a conversation today to go through and just disclose some of the challenges of this approach, where we're using one metric in order to forecast and predict dollars, of which we're going to use for ministry. And ministry depends on us in the finance back office that are building those budgets to be right, because ministry needs us to be right. We are going to start with the poll. So I'm going to jump right in. I could have stayed on that screen, but we're going to go right into this poll because I want to kind of take the temperature of where everyone is. So in using the per capita, the average gift per attendee, how accurate is it in projecting your annual giving? If it's number one, not accurate, a 10 would be extremely accurate. That's the rating scale. So we would love for you to share, how has it played out in your church when you use that one metric? I used to say, when I was talking about using more of an impact focused ministry in our finances versus just the numbers, I used to say that just using attendance was like taking our height and measuring our height and saying we're healthy. We used to just say our weight and height, then I'm healthy. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of other dynamics around being healthy other than just if we took our height. And if I took my height, I probably wouldn't be very healthy because I'm not very tall. But long story short, we want to make sure that we're really wrapping our arms around all of the pieces that will allow us to budget more accurately. So I don't know if we're ready to show. Do we show the poll or do we actually? Oh,
Yep.
okay. Wow. Okay. So we're looking at not very accurate. And then in the middle, we've got you're not bad in the middle at number 6. 5 and 6 is a hit or miss, I would say, when when you're using that. So this is a great topic. This is going to be very, very useful.
And Tammy, I think as I look in the chat already, there's a couple people saying we've never used it. And so I think that's the other aspect of it as well, is that we know that there's people who have never used it and there's people who have used it. But Tammy, I think let's just jump into the dialogue because per capita giving is something that's talked about a lot.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about it.
Well, yeah, so let's keep moving. So, um, I can give an example back when I was at Preston Trail Community Church and we were actually looking for a very large loan. We were building a brand new building in a brand new community in Frisco, and our growth was going to be exponential based on all the houses. And I was asked to project out 8 to 10 years of giving in order to get the loan. And the only thing I had was an average gift per attendee. Now, if you've been in church long enough, sometimes you can guess pretty good. And in that situation, I guessed pretty good, and within 5 years, we were still tracking as, but I was always nervous because we know it might be something easy to calculate, like it was to actually forecast out using that calculation. If other churches, those that don't use it, well, we have a lot of churches that happen to use that metric. You can benchmark yourself against other churches and you can see what seasonality looks like. Um, it provides a rough planning tool. So you can say we need X per person to fund our ministry. And a lot of time the senior pastors, that drove them too. Like obviously attendance and having people there to be able to share the gospel was huge. So that attendance was the driver. And then the average gift per attendee was kind of what we backed into. So, what are the challenges though with that per capita giving? And Dwayne, I know you and I've had a lot of conversations. So, sometimes when you're just using that number, you might have certain families that have given large amounts, right? And so in those large amounts, it spreads it out and it makes it look like you've got a lot of people giving a good amount. As soon as a large donor may drop off, and I know those of us that have been in church, that happens. And if it's a significant donor, you all of a sudden became much more fragile and vulnerable in being able to do ministry. In fact, it can mid-year, it could actually make you in a position where you have to reforecast and maybe do cuts. Oh, you're on mute, Dwayne.
First time on Zoom, Tammy, so let me get up to speed here. But yeah, I think what you're talking about, Tammy, is spot on. I think that having talked to churches who one a top donor, as you said, stopped giving and their giving dropped 5%, 10%. I mean, that's a substantial amount of reliance, and so you miss out on what the reliance on smaller groups. The other thing that happens with per capita is typically what I see is if you're a church that is growing and bringing in non-believers, non-givers, your actual per capita starts to drop. And I've seen circumstances where people start to freak out because their per capita giving is going down, yet they're actually growing in a very positive way. And so there's multiple opportunities for us to work through when it comes to per capita. But so I think it is definitely a core conversation.
Well, just the flip side of what you just said, and it's already bullet number 3, that participation decline. So what if on the other hand, your attendance drops, but that would make your per giving rise. So now you're in this situation where you've got the thought that you're getting more, and the reality is you're not as healthy as you thought. So to be able to answer the why you're giving is what it is, that is so critical. And that's where MortarStone came in for me, is to be able to answer that question why. If we jump back to the bullet number 2, some of the things that we haven't, as churches, probably been as diligent as being able to really understand the income levels of our congregants or different life stages or what's happening in the community economically. I think about where I am in my life is different than where I was 20 years ago. And as a baby boomer, we are in that point where you might have a lot of retirees that may be looking at a fixed income. So all of those things, to understand more about your donors than just the head count, is very critical. And then it doesn't always forecast well. I bet there's people on this webinar that say, man, we've been nailed, right on, right on. But it looks like, based on the poll, that that's not the case, that we were either below average or right in the middle where it's hit and miss. And again, I want to say how important it is from a finance perspective. The lifeblood of ministry is being able to project accurately what we're going to get in funds in order to fulfill our ministry. So we want to think about this and be smarter with our metrics. So this is going to be the fun part where we talk about how we can expand our thinking and become less of that snapshot or that one metric of how we become healthy, and look at what else we can do. And we want to start right off the bat with historical trends. I have had an opportunity just while I've been at MortarStone to talk to many people as we've been launching our budget forecasting tool. And I have been, and Dwayne, I know you've had the same conversation, so surprised at how people go back. Like, they've got Excel spreadsheets that go back 7 years. I always felt like once we hit COVID, things changed. But that 3 to 5 year, being able to look at what's happening in your total giving, being able to dig into those segments, what's happening in your core givers, those top and new givers, how are you evolving? And again, the ability to answer the question why. I sat in many elder boards where they would ask, how is our back door? What's the back door look like? Well, I've got new givers and I don't know how long they're here and I don't know who's leaving. How can I really forecast out to the future when I don't have that information? So here's an example. We just want to share little snippets of the system MortarStone. But when I got to the point, and it was at Preston Trail again, because I worked for an elder board there that was incredibly business minded. There were people on that board that were just so much smarter than myself, and they would ask for metrics that I just didn't have. So I knocked on MortarStone's door. I was one of the early adopters, and having the ability to give context to what's happening to your giving, not just not snapshots, gives you that true momentum to tell you, how are we doing? How are we doing today? And with the way we're doing today, our next level of being able to be confident is to say, what do we look like a year from now or 2 years from now? So again, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this little snapshot, but what this does here, Dwayne, you look at this all the time and you talk to people, you can navigate in MortarStone and look how you're doing with your core and with your top givers, see how they're playing out.
Well, and I think, Tammy, as you already said, I mean, part of it is just understanding what the data is telling you, and being able to look at it year over year is key. And I have to say, somebody commented that they've got a spreadsheet back to 1999, Tammy, but I don't think quite that far back. But I think but to your point, I've sat on elder boards and I've served elder boards, and I've had to both approve budgets and take budgets in for approval. And the thing that I found was, I was always asking the questions, why are we expecting this?
Mhm.
Why aren't we expecting this? And the more detail and the more data that was there, recognizing I'm a huge believer in a faith-based giving budget,
Yes.
but it also has to have some historical context to the conversation as well. And so that's where, to me, even the screen that you're showing here and just looking at what's going on there. So they're up but they're also they've got a high dependency on a few people with the 4% giving 39%. So there's a lot of factors in there that would be important to bring into the dialogue, especially if you start looking at ages of that 4%.
right? And again, it would skew your average gift per attendee with the hard, large emphasis on the top givers. So
Yeah.
again, let's just expand that a little bit more as we talk about that percentage of giving by segment. Obviously, if you've been in a church and you've been audited, one of the things they really look at is Cape and Krause was one of the auditors, and they actually gave us a health report, which was very great because they would have me dig in, and I would have to dig into the data to show them the dependency on those large donors, right? And they had actually a benchmark report that benchmarked us against churches of like sizes. And that was such a presentation for the board because that gave them confidence that we weren't over dependent on our large donors but there are a lot of churches that are in that situation. So you want to be able to also look at the number of new and consistent givers. New givers can be very, very tricky to actually count. When I was at Fellowship Church a gazillion decades ago, we actually worked in Excel and all we had was Excel. And we were literally tracking what we called churn. Before MortarStone actually did it, we were tracking churn because in a church like a Fellowship Church at the time, it was about going after the seekers. So sometimes when you're a seeker church, that churn is churning constantly, and it was a very heavy lift to actually be able to figure out the pulse. Now I wasn't necessarily being asked by a board at that point, but it was detrimental for me knowing because every year I potentially had to cut 500,000 $1 million out of my budget, and that wasn't an easy task when you're a fast moving church like that. So again, just a quick snapshot of what MortarStone does. They actually allow you to look at those segments and be able to look at the top donors, the new givers, top givers, and the churn rate. I mean, there were presentations, and I shared those with you just as examples. That churn was something that I then carried on to Preston Trail because as a new church, a new community, an older church in a new community, getting that rhythm of what our flow was absolutely critical because senior pastors, they have dreamers, they have missions, they want to do big things. I used to have to say, okay, here's your dream or your reach budget, and here's my managed to budget. Have to bring them back to reality.
And Tammy, that's really good. I was as I'm thinking about the presentation day. Yesterday, I was on a call with a lender who's working with the church who utilizes MortarStone, and so I was talking to them about some of the things that they're looking for, and they were talking about giver churn in that dialogue as well, as far as trying to understand, um, is the church really growing in their giving, or is it the back door larger? And it's something that they're just beginning to tackle. But I think even whether or not you think about it through a budget standpoint or the long-term health, giver churn is an important aspect of the dialogue. And when I look at a lot of churches, on the one screen where we look at new givers,
Mhm.
we look at what percentage of the new givers give a sixth gift. And for a lot of churches, that's less than 20% of the people in the year have given a sixth gift in that year. And so that just says the amount of new givers you have to bring in every year to turn them into long time recurring consistent givers is pretty large. And so as you're trying to build your budget, understanding what's your transition rate from a new giver into a consistent recurring giver is an important aspect of that conversation on top of what's going on with your top givers and your core givers.
Yeah. And Dwayne, I know this is really top of mind for you is in the discipleship. And as I was at these churches and serving them as they were growing, those new givers didn't just represent dollars coming in the door. They meant people were either following their journey and becoming Christ followers at a higher level, or they were new and they were giving for the first time. All of those things are greater and grander than just the dollars. And those are the questions I was being asked as well. And having a system like MortarStone was very helpful. So again, as we talk about that per capita giving, you've got to make sure that we're not skewing any kind of distribution. So if you're looking at the median gift size, that if you're looking at that versus the per capita, it avoids that skew from large givers. So expanding your metric is so important. Top that top 10 donor share, what percentage of giving comes from those biggest contributors? Now, healthy under 30% is a metric that I know I always looked at it. I needed it 20% or less, just in the churches that I ran. And some of you that are on this webinar may have even a different metric as well. But this one is extremely important. And one of the things that even before all these, like a MortarStone or other systems, again, living in Excel and building my own waterfall chart, trying to figure out where our vulnerability was. And some of the churches, you have been in existence for so many decades, like the spreadsheet from 1999, there may be this idea that there's not been change. You've had the same thing for decades and decades. And so you might become complacent in that. And there could come a time where you are aging out and it could make a big difference. So having your pulse on that might be very important. So again,
Hey, Tammy, real quick, just a reminder, if you've got questions or anything, put them in the chat or put something in the Q&A and I'll make sure Tammy answers that, or I'll give my perspective as well. But bottom line is we want this to be interactive. If there's things that you have or you want to talk about, we'd love to put them into the mix.
and it doesn't have to be a question. I would love for my peers to share what has been successful. If there's something that you do on a regular basis, because all of us here, we don't want to recreate the wheel. We want to learn from each other. And actually, if something you've done year after year has really nailed it, or as you've been challenged, you've been able to answer questions with some confidence and very with articulation, please share that, because that it's so wonderful when we get together to learn from our peers. So again, as we talk about really understanding our membership and those that are part of our community, how are we doing with that household income? You know, if we can determine, and again with MortarStone there is a tool there, but if we can find out that there's capacity to give more, maybe some giving marketing. And in marketing, I say that very general, or fundraising. It's more life change, how we're reaching out to change people's lives. There's a capacity to actually get people to become a more better stewards of their funds and be able to help grow the church and actually change lives. So there's a lot of things that you can do in that capacity that you may not be aware of. So
And Tammy, back on that, just a reminder that MortarStone, if you're using MortarStone, we pull in census data to be able to. We pull in census data, and that's what gives us the ability to get the median incomes. And so that's at a block level, so not a zip code, but really down to a very small circle around where each person lives. And so if you've got their address, we can geolocate that and provide a median income against that, which is relatively accurate, and go from there. So yes.
all right. So this is when we're talking about the budgets. I don't know about what you've been experiencing, but in the growing churches that I've been a part of, the senior pastors, their desire to grow is so strong that sometimes they'll push the envelope in the giving so that that pushes them. But again, we want to make sure that we build conservative budgets. And some of those that might be attending today actually budget 90%. And there are others that are striving to get to that 90% of giving. We're only going to budget 90%. But if you can look at your 3-year giving averages and smooth out those spikes and see what it looks like, be more conservative so that you can manage to ministry. But we always would build in levers that said, if we reach here, we'll pull this lever and add this ministry. But you have to know those fixed versus flexible costs. A lot of us live in a world where we're paying for the church mortgage. There is a lot of costs that aren't changeable. You can't get rid of the building. You can't, ditch that expense. There's
You
all
can't get rid of the donuts either, can you, Tammy?
or the fishies for the kids. There's
Yes.
certain costs that are fixed. So we want to be realistic. And optimism isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when you're trying to fulfill your mission, that's the top priority. So being realistic is very critical.
Hey, Tammy, a question that came in is average giving per unit a better way or just another view of per capita giving?
Average gift per attendee or per giving?
It says per unit. So
Okay, so it's a giving unit. It's just a different way. It's actually a more accurate, if you can actually give an average gift per giving unit, is better than attendance. So I actually switched to that at one point when I didn't have, then I felt more confident with that. It's better. It still is skewed by the large and the low, right? That when you're averaging, but I like a giving unit more than I do attendee. That's just my personal opinion.
and I think you still have many of the same challenges because a large gift in there can really wreck the average.
That's
As
why I would
you're
always pull out the anomalies and seasonal. I would,
which is closer, which it means you're probably closer to a median than an average. And I would probably, more so than the average, I would probably look at a median conversation. But even so, you've got some of the same challenges. A bunch of new givers will skew you low. As I always tell people, you add Danny DeVito to a basketball team and the median height and the average height goes down. You take him out of the mix and it goes up. And so being a boy from Indiana, basketball is about all I can put my stories around.
that was good. That was a good one. Very good. Thank you. So here we're going to do another poll. So part of, and before we do the poll, I want to set the stage for this. So I know during COVID, I was reforecasting probably every 3 months. It was a constant changing, ever changing, what we expected. When we had just started our fiscal year, we had to rebudget. And then as we were going, what was changing. But in a normal circumstance, when you're creating your giving budget, and then as you proceed through the year, if you are not hitting that target, how often does that happen? And so let's go ahead and launch this poll. So how often do you reforecast or create a revised budget? So monthly, quarterly, every 6 months, never, or not sure. So we'll go ahead and give you a second. I tried not to reforecast, to be honest, but I would say 6 times out of 10 in every year, depending on where I was, there was some sort of revision, and mostly because of new ministries. A lot of times, the senior pastors were very something new. They went to a conference and and heard something, and we had to implement it yesterday. So those were things that it prompted us. And you never took anything away. So a lot of things you thought, well, this is going to be unfunded, and it was always a challenge. So I don't know if we're ready to show it yet. See where we're at. Okay, never 63%. So I think there you go, 6 out of 10. Was I not right?
Well, and Tammy, when I think about the question and what you put there, my experience over 8 years would have been never.
Okay.
But what we typically did was, from that standpoint, we had our elder board actually had what we called an elder opportunity fund. And so that's how we would go fund new ministries and some other things within that space. And I can remember in COVID, like you, sitting there thinking, okay, what are we going to have to do? And trusting God for what he had told us was going to take place, but knowing that something else could. And so I would say we probably looked more at the expense side of the budget often as opposed to the giving side of the budget. But there were still times where we would wrestle with that and typically then would stay with the never category. So I think it just depends on it. There's a lot of different perspectives on a giving number is a giving number and you don't change it,
Yeah.
or it's just a number and let's be a little bit more fluid with it.
Right. I think the fluidity is so true. Like, I guess my question, and we can't have the conversation right now, but I would expand my question to say, okay, did you pull from reserves? How often did you pull from reserves to fund something, as opposed to reforecasting? Or, there's a lot of things that you just, like you say, we hold fast to that budget. It doesn't change, but we're pivoting in other ways to actually fund it. Or the never means it's pretty close every year, and that can happen. A lot of churches are very consistent, and there may come a time as the younger generation comes in, and I know we've had multiple webinars on what's happening around, with the generations. So there could be, could things change? The wind could be changing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and Tammy, some of the things that that people have thrown into the chat, which thank you guys. One said no answer that was there applies to them. We reforecast as needed if giving is outside of materiality threshold. Makes sense. Our fiscal year starts October 1st. This person reforecast and had to pull some triggers, but then at the end of the calendar year, God made up the difference and gave them a substantial increase. So, yep. It's actually interesting. I was in a meeting yesterday talking with a church, and the conversation came up about when do you start looking at, do I need to do something different with the budget? And the conversation was, well, typically the first quarter is just um, letting things shake out. And then our fiscal year was always started in September. And typically we would always go, if we saw something drastic in the first quarter of that, after that, we would really start to really wrestle with it. But typically we would let it go through the end of the calendar year to see what God was going to do through the lives of the people. And so it really is one of those things where I think there's a bit of science and art in this conversation.
It is absolutely, and it really depends on your fiscal year.
Right.
We're July 1st, and so we had to have enough funds that carried us through the summer, or else we would start the fiscal year really in a hole. Obviously, seasonality really helped, and again, you just have to be very um, diligent to understand the months that maybe your expenses exceed your giving, that you've got reserves to cover that. So we're going to segue into our new, just give you a little snapshot, if you will, of our new budgeting forecast tool. And I came to MortarStone for this reason, because as I'm, at the last quarter of my career, if you will, the one thing that I really wanted was some tool that would help me budget better with better assumptions, utilizing those segments like core, new, or top, band one being, under 200, they still count. Where do they fit in the picture? How can I budget using assumptions that then when I am asked every month, even if it's a positive variance, I can actually say exactly why. Now, it's not going to be saying, hey, John Smith just gave us, X amount of dollars. Maybe I do say that if it's appropriate, but generally speaking, I can weigh in and give them, take the temperature of the giving by strategically looking at the data and being able to disclose what's really happening. And I think one of the things that I've said all along when I'm talking to leaders, a lot of times we have so much data, and Dwayne, I think you said this on the last webinar we were in, is that you're drowning in data and you're starving for insight. And so one of the things that maybe there's a ton of data in your spreadsheet from 1999, but what kind of insights? And just so you know, at Fellowship Church, I think ours went back to the 80s. So it was this massive, and one cell error, and it all came crashing down. But nonetheless, we want to make sure we're being able to look at our giving in a way that tells a story, right? So you can use giving averages and all of those things, but at the end of the day, if we could confidently forecast the future as best we can with the information we have, then we get to align our ministry and make sure that we're fulfilling that. So let's just take a quick little peek here. There should be, uh-oh, where's my screenshots? Hang on. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I had a screenshot right there, but I'm gonna go through this and I'll let you see the screenshot in just a second. So that I say I gave myself the setup for this slide and completely forgot about it. So the story behind the numbers. So tying that financial data into the spiritual goals. So for example, a lot of us need, as we do ministry, they're asking for us to create, a lot of times it's a SMART goal. What's your SMART goal? Well, maybe in creating the giving budget, we can do the same thing and say, we want to grow consistent givers from 60% to 75. We aim to reduce reliance on their top donors by 10%. What if we actually created some goals like that and could measure against them? And this is a statement, it's not mine. I grabbed it from somewhere, Dwayne. I don't know where I got it. It says, when budgeting becomes discipleship, it moves from maintenance to mission empowerment. And I know you said you love that. I love this. I think that's where we're going. We want it to be more than the numbers. We want it to be intentional.
And Tammy, I wish I could say that was my quote, but it's not. But it might become mine over
It
time.
might have, it might have been you. I don't remember.
I wouldn't have said anything quite that eloquent, but I love the fact that when budgeting becomes discipleship, because that's what, you know, as an organization that believes that generosity reflects the discipleship in a church, then that really is a part of the journey that's here, is the fact that you set your budget based upon what's happening with your discipleship and how do you actually accomplish that. So I think that's perfect.
Yep. So again, behind every dollar is a story of faith and obedience. When churches steward their giving data with care, not just to forecast, but which we talked about, it's very important, but to disciple their people, they build something more than budgets. They build a culture of generosity rooted in wisdom, transparency, and spiritual growth. And I think that's what makes the budgeting tool for me at MortarStone so exciting, because what it does, it allows us to take the data that's already built inside of MortarStone, all of that data that's telling the story around our donors, where they are in their giving, what level of giving we're receiving from different groupings, age, demographics, all of those things. And then we can create a budget based on that content and then measure ourselves against it. And again, it does create dollars, and it does create a measurement other than just how much are we going to get. Now, obviously, we need to, that sounds so terrible. How much are we going to receive as a gift from those that are part of our community and want to participate in serving our community and bringing them to know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior? That's what it's all about. But as we're going through the forecast allows me to see where I am, where I thought I would be, and where I'm going. And that says so much more than just, are we meeting our budget? Again, a quick snapshot of looking at each month. When you look at each month, you can see whether you're on track. If you're behind, how are we landing? You can drill into each of these components and see all kinds of data that's behind that in the segmentation. It's so exciting to see what can be done with this product to not only budget to and not only look towards where you're going, but be able to answer that question why. Why are we where we are? And is there something we can do to change that trajectory? I think that's one of the big things, Dwayne, that has changed for me is that I was always looking in that rearview mirror. So when I was going to the board, I was telling them what had happened. I want to be able to tell them mid-month, this is where we're at. We're trailing. If there was the ability to put a video up that would inspire people to give, we could literally change the trajectory. Again, that's dollars, and from a financial mind, I seem to go there, but I know that it expands so much more into being a steward or growing us in our faith walk.
Well, and Tammy, I think, and one of our folks on the chat um, commented on the fact that they reforecast on a monthly basis. And so one of the things that I love about our tool that we put together is we create a new projection every month based upon where we sit, and we'll say that you are running ahead, behind, whatever the case might be. And so it's a great tool because I know as I sat in my office and my financial person, the person that on my team who would have been you, Tammy, who walked in and was telling me, here's where last month ended up. I would always ask the questions, why did we end up there, either up or down? What
Mhm.
does that mean for next month? And what does that mean for the year? And those were the kinds of things I was asking on a regular basis. And that's part of the heartbeat behind what MortarStone is working towards with the budget management, budget forecast tool, is to be able to give that capability.
Yeah.
Um,
And before we wrap up and just put it back to the audience for asking questions, I feel like the ability to answer the question why gives faith and confidence in those leadership because they're there to for oversight, not management. And we need to manage well so that when we present to them, we're literally telling them, is the church healthy? And I talk about this from the financial perspective in its totality. I used to tell the boards, it's as simple as telling you what we have, what we owe, where we are, where we thought we would be, and where we're going. And as long as I could answer those questions and be able to show it to them in the data in the simplest of form, a lot of times, as I learned growing in this ministry, I would always show them too much. They need to be able to have oversight, not management. So be very intentional. That's why the MortarStone product, not just the analytics, which in and of itself there is so much there that I would recommend if you have MortarStone, build out your custom dashboards that tell the story so that you can really show your leadership where you are, where you thought you would be, and where you're going. Because those answering those three questions are critical.
Yeah, I think that's great. Tammy, before, I know there's a couple other comments or questions in the chat that I want to make sure we talk about. So someone put in a comment that if you don't use a 90% to calculate your budget, what's a safe budget number? And so I'm going to assume as a church that every year, whatever prior year giving is, they budget at 90% of that so that they then have that opportunity to invest additional dollars. So Tammy, I know this is an area that you've worked in and talked through quite a bit. So I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say to the churches, and I've met so many that now that I'm not a CFO of a church, I've had such an opportunity through the MortarStone ecosystem to talk to so many churches that are actually doing the 90%. I can honestly say I've been 38 years. Every church I worked for, we never could do it. They couldn't do it. Now, I don't know whether it was because it was a growing church, the communities that we worked in, but I had to be very vigilant and on top of the numbers constantly, because the way they budgeted was, if we work at 100%, we're going to grow at 115. So my 15%, so instead of saying we're going to budget to 90%, they would be budgeting at 115. That's that's where I had to bring down that expectation and try to get them to at least 100% that we break even. And if we get 15, now God was so good that we always ended up with a surplus, but it wasn't built in. It wasn't budgeted that way. It was managed to month over month. So to answer that person's question, 90%, if you can do that, that is the best way. Even 95, get to 95. But it is harder for those of us in the finance seat to not have any contingency or buffer. Now, I would try to build in a contingency and put that in the budget, but it seemed to get eaten up very fast because, again, I was working with fast growing churches.
And Tammy, I know we typically, I think we always had, for most years, we were 103%, 105%, 106%. I can think of a couple of years where we were that because we were growing, and we always, the thing that we operate under is we're going to build out a budget that we believe God's going to provide, and then we'll back off of it if we need to. And so that's why we always went push forward. And so I'm not sure that there's ever a truly safe percent of what the budget to ask for. I think a lot of it just comes down to what the philosophy is of the church and how you want to manage the expenses and the giving. And so anyway, so thank you. So another question is, does the tool, so the budgeting tool, does it extrapolate the giving to projecting the year end giving? How does it account for persons who give at the end of the year?
Okay, so what it does is it will take out anomalies. So people that give at the end of the year, if that has been consistent, that would be a forecast. And if you look at your trailing 12 months, the system looks at things that are 50% higher than your trailing 12, and it's going to remove that as an anomaly. So it'll allow seasonal to be included because seasonal happens. But if there's large gift anomalies, if it's forecasting forward, it's going to remove those anomalies. Now, the good news is we actually show forecasts that show both the trend and the forecast. The trend could be what has happened, but you can look at both numbers at all times.
So Tammy, actually go back to a couple slides and show the screen there. Yes, that one. And because I think what you're talking about is you can see the seasonality of what's there and the expectation of what the December, as we always used to call it, the December hockey stick going up at the end of the year. And so we're able to do that based upon the trends of the multiple years in the past. And so that's a core factor here. So thank you.
Great question. Great question.
Yep.
Because we used to have to do that in Excel, right? You'd have to find those anomalies and to be able to project out accurately. But you want to leave seasonality in there, the realistic seasonality.
Yep. That's awesome. And right now, I think that looks like about the end of the questions. So Tammy, take us to the last slide again, real quick. So one, please reach out to us. We'll be sending out a recording of this message. I know a couple people have already asked to get the slides. When you get the recording, just respond back and I'll be happy to fire off the slides to you. But we're also happy to hop on further dialogue and talking through some of this based upon Tammy's experience, my experience, or there's a lot of other people on here who have a ton of experience. Also, as we wrap up, we are heading into both, for many people, budget planning season, but also end of year giving season. And one of the things that we want to provide to anyone who's asked for it is we basically provide a guide every year that you can give out to the people in your church to consider what end of year giving might look like. And so if you're typically talking about gifts of cash at the end of the year, this actually helps people who potentially are age 70 and a half or older, who should be thinking about giving from the IRAs, from a real estate transaction or whatever. We'd love to we'd love to provide you that guide. It's both got a guide for you, the church, but also a tool that you can give out to the people. And so do that. And then a couple of people are asking, how do you create the forecast in MortarStone? And that's an area, reach out to us, respond back to us, and we'd be happy to show you that journey. So just excited about the conversation. And Tammy, I want to say thank you for being a part of the journey with us. And we will be reaching out and talking to folks as needed. And so we'd love to talk about how we can help you both grow discipleship. And we always look at it through the fact of, how do we help you grow your givers? And then how does that help drive your giving so that you can accomplish the mission that God's given you? And so that's what we want to do. And so just want to say thank you to everybody, and we will talk again next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.